You've probably never heard of a web series called Object Players. And honestly, maybe that's for a reason. But behind this obscure show is one of the wildest, most chaotic production stories you'll find online. And today, we're going to dig into why.
So let's get right to the heart of it. This one single show, was rebooted 5 times. And not over a decade. No, this was 5 times in just 2 years. Think about that. 5 different casts, 5 different titles, 5 complete do-overs for the exact same project. It's this insane cycle of just starting over and over and over again. You gotta ask yourself, what on earth was going on?
So to figure this mess out, we can't just look at a timeline of who quit when. No, we've got to go deeper. We need to look at the characters at the very heart of the show. Because the real key to why Object Players kept self-destructing, it all comes down to them, and a creator's super specific and, yeah, really controversial vision.
All right, so let's start with the constants in all this chaos. You see, a former writer for the show let us in on a little secret. No matter how many times the entire cast got thrown out, 3 characters always survived the purge. They were the ones who were completely off-limits, the non-negotiables.
First up, we have Gummy Bear. Her whole thing was basically that she ate a ton of sugar, and this could be used as a sugar rush superpower to help her team win challenges. You know, a pretty straightforward gimmick.
But here's where things get complicated. Gummy Bear might have been a permanent fixture, but she was also a huge source of controversy. This quote from a popular reviewer, BAO's Object Show Reviews, really nails it. The audience saw something in this character, something very specific, and frankly, pretty uncomfortable.
And look, the criticism wasn't subtle. People were pretty direct about it. They said her design just felt out of place, like she didn't belong with the rest of the cast. And her personality? It felt super shallow, basically boiling down to, as that same reviewer bluntly put it, being a fat pick. This wasn't a one-off complaint either. This was a theme that just kept coming up.
Okay, so the second character, who was always safe, was Pridey. Now, here's an important piece of context. The show's creator is part of the LGBTQ community and actually based Pridey on themselves. But even with that personal connection, the way the character was written, well, it became another huge lightning rod for criticism.
Yeah, this next quote from that same reviewer is, wow, it's incredibly blunt, but it perfectly sums up how a lot of the audience felt. The intent might have been good, but the execution, it just wasn't landing. It felt less like real, thoughtful representation and more like a walking, talking stereotype.
The main issue people had was that Pridey's entire personality seemed to be just sass, being feminine, and talking about beefy men. It felt really one-dimensional. And we actually know that this was a problem behind the scenes too, because that former writer we mentioned, they said they tried to rewrite Pridey specifically to, and I'm quoting here, act less like a stereotype and more like an actual gay person would.
And rounding out our untouchable trio is Dolly. Now, Dolly was a little different. Her design was actually seen as pretty cool and creative. Her personality, though, total massive diva. But just like Gummy Bear and Pridey, it didn't matter what fans thought, she was never, ever getting cut.
So why? Why were these 3 characters so essential? Well, this quote from that former writer, Handymander, lays it all out. It reveals the creator's real motivation. It wasn't about what the audience wanted, or even what made for the best story. The creator, A-Isle, had a plan. They had decided from the very beginning that these 3 characters were going to make it to the finals, period. And if they had to reboot the whole show to make that happen, so be it.
So what you have here is a really interesting clash, right? On one side, you've got the creators' favorites, controversial, maybe not well-liked, but their spots are guaranteed. But on the other side, you have a character that the fans and critics actually loved. So what happened to that guy?
And that brings us to Card. Card is the perfect example of the other side of this coin. He wasn't a creator's pet. He was a genuine, honest-to-goodness fan favorite, a real breakout star.
You can just feel the excitement in this review, right? Card was seen as this total breath of fresh air. He wasn't some simple gimmick or a flat stereotype. No, this guy was a strategist, a gambler who was playing the game and making things actually interesting.
And it wasn't just random. He had a real, defined strategy. He was out there making deals. He built this tight alliance called the Three Aces. And there was even this amazing scene where he's doing a puppet show. The reviewer, Bayo, pointed this out as this brilliant visual metaphor for how Card was pulling all the strings in the competition. This was a deep, well-written character.
But here's the gut punch. All that cool stuff about Card, it all came from one person, that same writer we've been talking about, Handymander, who also did his voice. So what happens when that writer gets fed up with all the creative drama and quits? Well, in the very next reboot, Card is still there, but is basically a background prop. No lines, no strategy, nothing. The fan favorite just disappeared, right along with the writer who created him.
So, okay, we've seen this conflict play out on a small scale, right? The creator's darlings versus the fan favorite. Now let's zoom out and look at the bigger picture. What did this reboot approach do to the entire cast?
Just look at these numbers. This is from just one reboot, the first one. 13 characters were just gone, wiped from the show, and 13 brand new ones were dropped in to replace them. Can you imagine that as a viewer? You get invested in someone and poof, next episode they're gone, replaced by a total stranger. And this wasn't a one-time thing. It kept happening.
I mean, the result is pretty obvious, right? How are you supposed to build any kind of story, any kind of character development, when the cast is basically a revolving door? You can't. As a fan, it's impossible to get attached to anyone because you know they could just vanish forever in the next reboot. It's a recipe for disaster. And all of this, it all points back to one single fundamental problem at the very core of this whole mess. It's a story we've seen before, really. It's about what happens when a creator's personal vision is so rigid, so inflexible, that it just can't handle the real world of working with a team or listening to an audience.
That former writer, Handymander, used the word perfectionist to describe the creator. But we're not talking about the good kind of perfectionism, the kind that makes art better. This was different. This was a destructive cycle, where the desire for a perfect show, which really just meant to show where their favorite characters won, meant throwing away everything. Finished scripts, animation that was already done, just trashing the hard work of the entire crew over and over. And this really brings us to the final bit of wisdom from that writer, from their farewell message. It's such a powerful insight, not just for this show, but for any creative project. Having a vision is great, it's essential. But if you can't cooperate, if you can't listen to the people helping you, if you can't adapt, that vision stops being a guide and it just becomes a prison.
Which, leaves us with a really big question, doesn't it? The whole crazy story of Object Players is really just a small example of a huge conflict that happens in creative work all the time. When you have the creator's vision pulling one way, the hard work of the crew pulling another, and what the audience actually wants pulling a third way, who's supposed to get the final say?